Is the two-party system broken? The two-party system is often blamed for a lot of the world's problems, but to answer the question, you have to understand the history of the system and how the system works. It all began with the Federalist versus Anti-Federalist debate when the Constitution was being written and ratified. The Federalist pro-Constitution group and the Anti-Federalist anti-Constitution group eventually formed the first two political parties during the Washington administration. In this original system, the two parties were opposites and both extremes. Although Washington himself was never on one party, members of his administration, Hamilton and Jefferson, were, and they argued on a lot of issues, Hamilton winning most, with an example being the Bank of the United States. So therefore, at this point, the federal government was mostly controlled by the Federalist Party, with parties having opposite goals and not many compromises. There were a lot of changes to the system by the time of the Progressive Era. The two parties were no longer opposites, but still opposed each other on a lot of issues. They both possessed similar progressive goals, but had different ideas of how to achieve them and what issues needed to be fixed. For example, Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson both believed in the method of trust busting to clean up the economy, but Roosevelt believed that there were good trusts and bad trusts, and only the bad needed to be broken. At this point, there was no full control by one party or the other, and the ideas of the two parties seemed to be much more similar. Post World War I, there was a huge change in the two party system. Immediately after the war, we saw a flaw in the system, with the failure to join the League of Nations. Both parties generally believed it was a good idea to join, but due to an inability to compromise on specific terms, they never did. In the Roaring Twenties, we see almost complete control by the Republican Party, because the Democratic Party was split by internal divisions. Although we did see initial success in these years, the Great Depression did come, and whether or not it was the fall of the Republican Party, they were not able to fix it. We then saw a switch in the government as the Democratic Party took most control. But although the Democratic Party had control, some of their extreme legislative ideas, such as the AAA and the NRA, were still blocked by the Supreme Court. Therefore, there was a huge change in the two-party system in this era. Instead of having two parties constantly battling and sometimes compromising, we had a pendulum effect as control flipped from one extreme side to the other, each side reaching too far. So how is it operating today? I interviewed Superintendent Berg about his experiences with the state legislator influencing our school district, and it seems like we've just recently gone through a local political shift. Two-party system.
Well, I think, my perception prior to 2023 legislative session would have been different than it is now. I think seeing the state government under the control of one party and how you lose any negotiating, give and take, any compromise when that's the situation.
It seems that the state legislature has recently been shifted to being controlled by a Democrat majority. It is Mr. Berg's belief that the issue isn't with the two-party system itself, but with the way that we choose candidates. Do you believe the two-party system is broken?
No, I think it goes back to what I said before. I don't think the system is broken. I think it, again, my opinion has to do with how we are generating candidates into that two-party system. And I think when we look at the caucuses and things like that, where we have a very small minority of people in a party bringing forth candidates, it is very easy to have a viewpoint represented that may not be the viewpoint of the entire party. I think that's the part that needs to be looked at and tweaked. I don't necessarily think it's the two-party system.
With the ways primaries work, candidates are often chosen for being extremes. Therefore, the two different parties end up emerging as complete opposites, as they did during the Washington administration. So is the two-party system broken? I'd say it depends on your personal political beliefs. The two-party system nowadays is operating closely to how it has in the past. It shares similarities with all of the different eras, and I think it still promotes the same general outcomes as it has in the past. The two parties, being extremes and opposites, stop each other from going too far. As soon as one party does, the other takes over power and fixes it. This leads to people from each party becoming upset with the progress the other one makes. and the inability to completely go to one extreme. But if you look at it from a larger perspective and think long term, it keeps our government in a pendulum effect like it did post World War I, and this prevents temporary political trends and majorities from making too large of an effect on our country.